Hi everyone, welcome to New in Data Tech with Julia, where I get to indulge my inner techie and ask executives from the cool technology companies enough questions so I understand how their technology would have solved the challenges I had in my career and that my clients currently may be facing as well. Today, I'm very happy to welcome Eliud Polanco, who is the president of Fluree. Welcome, Eliud.
Hi, Julia. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too. And just in full transparency, I'm on the board of advisors for Fluree. Having said that, I have listened to Eliud and participated in multiple sessions, but still explaining everything that Fluree does gets complicated. So, Eliud, I'm really looking forward to the session. And this time around, we're going to go through use cases and not just talk generally what the platform does. But just to start with, can you very simply tell me what's a good way, one liner or one sentence to describe what does Fluree do?
Sure. And one thing I'll say is that Fluree itself is not complicated, just the problems that we're trying to do with are very complex. And the easiest way to describe what Fluree is we have lots of ways of technically connecting and linking to data, but it's really still hard to make it accessible and useful and findable. And so one way to think about what Fluree is we're kind of like a semantic connector to data and information. What we do is we try to have the business describe in business terms using terms they understand. We find ways to connect and link information and make it accessible using the business semantics. And so that's hopefully, Julia, the easiest way is to just link, connect, make data completely accessible, but using business terminology and business ontologies and glossaries.
So semantic connector. Understand the data semantically and connected data from multiple sources.
That's correct.
Very simplified way. So let's go through use cases, and I'm going to go through the use cases or challenges that I've been working on in my career. One of really good from the business value perspective initiatives that we've done was data-driven distribution, accelerations of sales function within the company. And what we had to build was bringing data from multiple external sources, bringing data from CRM, in this case it was Salesforce, connecting all of this data. That took forever because external data has its own format, CRM of course has its own, and we had multiple instances of Salesforce. That's also not fun. And then running analytics on it and serving analytics back to salespeople in the Salesforce. So where are the pieces where Fluree can help accelerate this?
If I abstract it to kind of broader sales and marketing use cases, what we've seen is that a lot of real value comes when you're able to semantically connect products, accounts, customers, transactions. And if I could resolve them and link them together, that asset is really valuable for solving your distribution problem, but also solving all kinds of cross-sell and upsell, and even KYC, compliance or regulatory use cases. So like you said, multiple CRM systems, multiple third-party lists. Everyone describes something slightly different. So we basically semantically connect it. And then also semantically connect it at the record level. So Julia, as you said, you could have 4 different Julias in each CRM system and in your third-party list, and they each have technical IDs. So what we do is we actually create a semantic ID for this entity called Julia, which is a customer, and create one semantic ID for each product that Julia interacts with. And ultimately, we're just linking and connecting this information. The way to think about it is the end result is this nice little kind of ID graph of all these common key IDs that we've created for every unique thing that was important in the model.
Okay, so the sales acceleration use case is a very common one. And it also happens to be one of the quote unquote easier ones for the companies to start with, because a lot of it is external data. And so that would kind of call you and say, okay, can you come over and help me with connecting that? And then I might get a lot more out of it than I thought I did when I called you the first time.
And we can always start with the pieces of the model that make sense. If it's just connecting counterparties or just connecting guarantors or just connecting clients, and then saying, okay, once I have clients, now I can expand to accounts, and I can expand and clean products, and I can expand to transactions. The idea behind this kind of semantic approach is that it really scales nicely based on the use case that you're trying to solve.
Yep. So next problem. The second one is mergers and acquisitions. So companies buy other companies, and usually the other company has a very different technology footprint. They still have a CRM, but it's a different CRM, or they still have an ERP, but it's a different ERP. And a lot of companies don't really go and integrate that or get to one ERP or even two ERPs. So again, based on our conversation before, it seems like if I'm a company that's about to go through post-merger integration, Fluree would be a very useful product for it. Is that something that you've actually helped and done with customers?
Yeah, I think generally for us, if we're dealing with a very heterogeneous estate, lots of connectors, lots of different sources, sometimes those are the cases where having this semantic connector approach is really efficient or effective. Because at the end of the day, we're describing a certain set of things that the business really cares about. I wanted to consolidate resources. I want to consolidate employees. And so we can kind of take that approach to methodically go through step by step, semantically connect and link everything in a graph, and then ultimately start turning down or shutting down functionality.
Okay. So it's things where you want to bring them together, ERP, CRM. Does it actually physically bring it together, or can you leave them the way they are and just basically have a connectivity on the analytics level, but not necessarily, if you're not up to it yet, change business processes? Because obviously not only systems are different, there is a business process behind it that's different, and training and resources and all of it. So you may not necessarily want to immediately jump into one ERP for everybody, but you do want to immediately use data from a CRM system, because one of the major reasons you may have bought this company is to have access to its customers. So it would behoove you to have access to the customers and the information.
Yeah, and I know that one of the big challenges for why we never turn down any of the old systems, and why we always end up getting like 15 different ERP systems and 12 different CRM systems, is because the process integration is really hard, and sometimes each business unit came with really great best practice in terms of the processes, and they don't want to lose that by physically moving to another different system. So in this case, what we would care about is virtual consolidation. I actually think that data virtualization using semantics is actually far more achievable and viable versus kind of what we used to do before. And so in this case, one of the things that you could do with Fluree is you can basically identify these semantic relationships. For example, if I find Julia in 2 ERP systems and 1 CRM system, I can save the mapping, the relationship that Julia physically exists in these 3 systems, save that into a knowledge graph. And then if I ask a question knowledge graph, get me everything about Julia, we can fire off 3 different federated queries. And the knowledge graph knows, because we have the mappings and we have the instructions on how to interact with which table, which column, which record ID Julia appeared in, we can actually fire off federated queries and then integrate the data and compose it on the fly.
So let me just recap. Basically, in merger and acquisition type of scenario, there are 2 major challenges after the merger. The first one is to get to the value out of acquisition. And that very often requires access to either product or customer data in the other company. Combining all the information, getting into one CRM or one ERP takes a really long time. But you can get, with Fluree, you can get to value much faster while you figure out how you actually, if you even want to get to one, what's your overall long-term platform strategy. And second challenge with post-acquisition is that you want to be able to account, financially report for the entire company.
Yeah.
And so that's also, Fluree helps with that much quicker before you do this whole reorganization and you decide again what's your long-term strategy in terms of the platforms for financial reporting, for ERP again, and so on. So did I get that kind of right? Okay. So Eliud, one of the things that I know about Fluree is that you use knowledge graph. I always loved knowledge graph, but I could never find a good enough business reason to go to the trouble and expense of implementing one. So it's something that data geeks are very excited about, but there has just never been enough value. What do you think, what changes now
generative AI has been, I think, a really big driver lately on really good business-facing use cases on using the graph. And the idea here is that large language models have tons of information, right? The large language models have been built because they've been trained on the entire internet. The only problem is that when it's connecting to your data, it's never seen your data. There's a lot that it doesn't know about your information. It's seeing it for the very first time. And so where the systems tend to hallucinate or where they make mistakes is where they try to make inferences by connecting enterprise information with generalized information. And what knowledge graphs are really good at they're really good at creating factual truth and restricting it and saying, don't make up stuff. This is the actual information, so that all of your responses and everything that you do have to be grounded against this defined set of information.
But so does a relational database. Like relational database gives you all the facts about your enterprise. So what is it about the graph? Because that's one of the problems. Graph was always better at many things, but the relational databases were just good enough that going to graph didn't make business sense.
So it goes back to why I think that graph is so much more effective for data virtualization, which is when you're trying to connect everything, the data that you're looking at is never going to be in one table or one database or one view. It's going to be spread out across 50 different systems. And what we've seen when we've tried to kind of train the large language models to pull data out of SQL databases is if it has to join more than 4 SQL tables, figuring out the join logic gets really hard. And you start to see lots of mistakes and actually bad data getting pulled back because the SQL queries are just way too complex. And just being able to do stuff in a graph where there's no such thing as a join because everything is just naturally relationships, that's where I think we're getting some significant accuracy and improvement in kind of pulling information using graph retrieval augmented generation versus kind of the typical SQL techniques.
Okay. So basically what we're saying, if as a company, when we want to use large language models that trained on enterprise data, not external data, and want to improve the accuracy, we should create a graph database, but it makes sense to go and talk to Fluree to build that semantic graph.
What we've seen to be very successful is if we kind of split the problem in half and say the LLMs are really good, if you give it grounded truth, they're really good at reasoning out or simulating the effect of reasoning out and come up with some really clever answers. They're not as good at information retrieval for data that it's never seen before. And so if we decouple the problem and say Fluree will create a semantic interface to the LLMs, we will take care of securely passing grounded truth to the LLM. And then we let the LLM construct the response. That's the kind of pattern that we've seen that's much more accurate and much more viable for production.
Okay. Oh, all right. That makes sense. So one of the things you keep saying, semantically connect what business language to technology estate. So it's a challenge of a lot of data programs because pretty much every chief data officer I know, including myself, when you come in and you start a data program, you start thinking, okay, we need a data catalog. We absolutely need a data catalog. But they have a first mile problem, meaning you can get technical metadata in. Getting business metadata in requires most often business people spending time entering information in, and business SMEs don't have time because they need it everywhere. There are usually very few of them. And also it's not actually their job. And they don't necessarily have value coming out of it, out of catalog, because they already know all of this. So they don't actually need catalog. So it's hard to get people to do work that's not within their job description, that doesn't immediately bring them value. So you have a lot of both technical and cultural issues. So, but it sounds to me like it's a much smaller use case, but Fluree can be really helpful there, building that semantic understanding and connecting to technology piece. Again, maybe one type of entity at a time. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, and in this case, we're looking at technical metadata as opposed to the actual data itself, because we're just trying to connect the dots and say, okay, I get it. These data sets contain these types of classes of information, these types of entities. So the idea is to enable a process that allows you to have lots of different semantic routes to the data, and then just connect and stitch the physical and the logical data together.
So that sounds great, but it does sound like magic. And I'm a very skeptical person when it comes to magic in technology. I generally don't believe in magic. So let's draw back the curtain and see what's behind the curtain and what do you actually do?
So very quickly, first of all, a lot of the techniques and a lot of the technology try to solve these problems semantically are 20 years old. The only problem is that it's almost like speaking a completely different language. So when you start talking about things like resource definition framework and RDF and triple, people's eyes just gloss over, right?
Well, mine, I think, just did.
Okay.
And I'm a data geek.
So this is par for the course. And so part of our secret is there are all kinds of existing technologies and best practices and standards for how to do it, but we just hide a lot of that complexity. So you just deal with the information in a way that makes sense to you, and we hide the fact that, yeah, under the covers, we're really doing a lot of stuff with OWL and RDF and W3C standards around triples and stuff, but you don't need to worry about all that complexity. So that's part one, which is we're building on 20 years of really good resources to try to solve this problem. But the second thing is there's been so much advancements in machine learning and AI and how to use reinforcement learning. So with very little input from the business and by being able to crowdsource certain decisions, I can get so much knowledge for you if you're able to describe the information in the model or the way that makes sense to you. Let's say if you're in the insurance space, you cared about policies and plans and claims, and there's a specific set of terms that really matter to you. We would just ask questions like, is this an example of a claim, or is this specific column an example of the claim incurred date? Or is this the claim liability date? And then you kind of come back and say thumbs up or thumbs down. And it's those simple little questions and that simple little feedback that really powers these models that can get pretty smart so they can start to like spot all these patterns.
So do you have actually interface, a Fluree application, and it shows this is the question, up, down. And I can do it in between the meetings. So if the meeting is boring, I can multitask, which I'm sure nobody ever does, but still.
Very simple questions, thumbs up, thumbs down, match, no match. And I think that's part two of our secret sauce.
All right. So you basically do a little bit what Catalog does. You connect to the technical metadata, and you connect to business, and then you run your machine learning. And machine learning is a bit of a magic, but at this point, we're kind of used to that magic. And then you have supervised machine learning, and that refines the model. Does that take, and I know it's kind of a silly question because it depends on how big in the state and how big is the company, but does that take a really long time, like months?
So yeah, so if we can get access to the right subject matter experts, it really is less than an hour a week for about 3 weeks. And it usually takes about maybe 3 or 4 rounds of training. So the data comes in, the system will, based on the starter ontology, take a first guess or first pass, and then it will create a set of training tasks and then farm it out to different people. And then different people are going to be asked, do you agree, do you disagree? And there's this continuous loop, about 2 to 3 weeks, the system get really smart.
Okay. All right. So once the training is done,
the third thing is then just going to be, let's start defining security and access control policies. What's the data contract around who's allowed to get access to Julia's information? And the really cool thing about doing this semantically is that you can describe the policies and the data contract semantically. And you can also describe it via relationships. So one thing that you could do is you could say, if I'm a trader, for example, and I cover this portfolio, you're only allowed to see personally identifiable information about the asset class managers for the funds that I personally oversee. That's a relationship. That's a semantic relationship. It's very easy for you to describe a very simple semantic rule or semantic contract that then allows you to restrict access so that you can see exactly what you're supposed to see and no more.
Okay. So got it. So now you know what the entities are, you know how to tell them who is the same and who is different. You know how to tell them apart, and you have security built in. So one more question, does it matter what technology stack I have in my company for me to be able to use Fluree?
So we've really tried to set it up so that we are able to semantically link and connect to any type of data, any platform, anywhere. So even when we're creating kind of these graphs, one of the really cool things about Fluree is it's completely open source. You can deploy it on any cloud, you can deploy it on-prem. And the way that it's designed, because it's all based on open standards, and as long as security and policy connect you or allow you to connect, we can literally stitch together all this data as if it was one physical database and connecting information so that you can have data highly federated. Our goal is to stop copying and moving data because that's the bane of our existence. And our goal is hopefully keep it in place. and just create these semantic pointers to it, and then just compose your question on the fly as you need the information.
Well, thank you, Eliud. I think I can explain what Fluree does even if you aren't in the room. Thank you for coming to New in Data Tech.
Thank you so much for inviting me.